So I guess I had been internalizing jazz music and also what they now call jump music. Louis Jordan and Roy Brown and all this. He had tons of that stuff too. Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Benny Goodman, Gene Krupa, all that type of thing. And he had and he was just starting to delve into Charlie Parker a little bit. Actually, I think unwittingly he bought those albums because it said jazz, not knowing what was on them. So he was playing this stuff all the time. So I think my brain was internalizing this before I could walk, because as a baby, his friends would come over and they'd listen to records, and I'd be sitting out in the front room with him. And I don't remember this, but that's how the story goes. But I do remember this. At 4, I finally got over to the drum set, and I could somehow play right away. I mean, I played kind of a Gene Krupa tom-tom thing. This was the 50s.
You had 4? And, you were 4?
You had 4.
All right.
And and he was like, whoa, because it all made sense. It didn't sound like a guy beating on things. I can remember doing it, and I remember their reaction. And somehow I knew I could play already. I didn't even think about it, And they took me to a nightclub that night and had me sit in with some friends of theirs. I had to stand up to reach the pedals.
So you sat in with a band the first day that you played drums?
Yeah, it's kind of wild. I know. I mean, my father wasn't the kind of guy to think about, well, he needs to learn how to play time, and he just took me right to the club. and he didn't, none of that was thought about. It was just, oh, man, he's got talent, let's go. And
all right.
I sat in and I stood up to play because I couldn't reach the pedals, and we played Sweet Georgia Brown, and I played a drum solo and got house. Everybody was like, wow. And so, I'm still going.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, that's the story.
Now
however, he traveled, so we went to New Orleans and Savannah and Atlanta and all throughout my life until I got into high school. And even sometimes then, he would take me to different nightclubs, and I'd sit in and play with the band. He'd buy the drummer a drink or the band leader a drink or give him $5 or something. In those days, this was cool,
Right.
You could get away with it. And I'd sat in with, everybody and played all kinds of music, from bebop to avant-garde to funk. I played with Frogman Henry when I was 12. I wasn't in the band, but I'd sit in,
Mm-hmm.
And we were in New Orleans and that type of thing.
All right. Now, you've played with a whole lot of people. Can we run down some of those? Because you played with Albert King at a very young age, right?
I did. I wasn't in most of these. I wasn't in his band, but I was in a club where he came and played for a week, and I was the drummer. And he came back once or twice, so he wasn't the kind of guy that you could get to know too easily. But he did teach me some things about the blues. First of all, listening to that guy sing and play. This is before he was popular.
Mm-hmm.
This is before the hippie thing started, and that made the blues popular. This is when it was really Chitlin Circuit, sawdust floors and barbecue pit in the floor, that type of deal. My father would take me to these places, and so eventually, I'd get hired because, I was underage and they could probably get me for $10,
Right.
And I could play. So they were like, yeah, this guy, I was already a fairly sophisticated jazz drummer at 12 or 13, so I could cut these gigs. But he would teach me things, and there were drummers there would teach me things about the backbeat and the shuffle, showed me all kinds of shuffles and different ways to hit the backbeat and what different things meant. And the lyrics of the blues, I'd hear them going by in my brain all the time, was what I started hearing in my brain, was those guys shouting and screaming and what a lot of those sayings and terms that they were using meant. At first, I just didn't. I instinctively kind of I emotionally got it, but it took me, by the end of the second week, I was starting to talk like those guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The sayings and the jazz musicians' lingo, if you will, and that type of deal. I started to understand, and I felt that kind of communication cut to the quick of the situation rather than the other words,
Right, yeah. Absolutely.
So
yeah.
that's where I'm coming from, and I mean, I learned. Let's put it this way: I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Also play with Albert Collins, Jimmy Reed. I'm trying to think of these guys. O.C. Smith, Jimmy Hughes had a hit out called "Steal Away" at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and I really can't think of all the guys that came through there that I played with, but there were a ton of them. You know what I mean? I was there for a while. I go in and out of that gig. I stayed on it one time for a year. You know,
Right.
went back for another year.
Now, you played with Vince Guaraldi on the Charlie Brown stuff, at least some of it, didn't you?
I played on a little of it. I played with Vince. The first guy drummer to do that was Colin Bailey.
Mm-hmm.
And then Colin got busy in L.A. and couldn't come up, so I was about 18, and Vince, I ended up playing somewhere, and he heard me, and he hired me that night. He said, I want you to do this run with me of ski resorts. So I did a run of ski resorts with him, and by the way, he said, get a bass player that you like, so I called Paul Jackson, who was my best friend.
Right, and the guy from the Headhunters, yeah.
Yeah. And he played upright then.
All right.
Which most people don't know. He didn't play any electric bass at that point in his life.
Wow.
So we played, and later on, Ron McClure played with Vince and I, and several bass players. Seward McCain went through the band, but I played with him for years, and those Charlie Brown things, I did a couple of those shows.
All right.
TV shows.
And those are still on, so you're still, new people are hearing you all the time. That's what's so great about that. Those are still there.
And don't know it. Nobody would think that would be me.
Well, now some more people know now, but that's good. But tell us about how you got the Herbie Hancock gig.
One day Paul Jackson and I had a house out in East Oakland that his father had got for us, rented. We were young guys, and we wanted a place we could rehearse. So his father said, his father was into real estate, and he hooked us up this rental, and it was dirt cheap, and it was a big house. And we had a B3 in the front room, and drums and basses and this and that, and all the guys would come over and jam constantly. So one day Paul Jackson came home and said, hey, man, I'm going to do this gig with Little Anthony and the Imperials up in Reno, Tahoe, Lake Tahoe. And I'm like, all right. So he goes away, and he comes back, and he said, hey, dig this. A guy named David Rubinson heard me on this gig, and he's Herbie's manager and wants me to play with Herbie Hancock. And I'm like, well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And that's how it started. And then Herbie started calling the house every day to talk to Paul, and Paul was really a social animal, so he was gone all the time doing stuff. And I'd have these 2- and 3-hour conversations about life, politics, everything you've ever thought of, writing, movies, Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, the whole thing.
Right, yeah.
Sugar Ray Leonard, whatever, And boxing, jazz, Miles, Tony, Elvin, Philly Joe, And he knew all those cats and had played with him, of course. So
right.
I asked him all about the Miles band with Tony Williams and Ron Carter, and he'd talk and talk. He liked to talk. Herbie still likes to talk. I think he used to really engage. Anyway, one day he says, hey, wait a minute, man. Don't you play some drums? Paul Jackson told me you could play drum. You play great drums. And I said, well, yeah, I'm a drummer. And he said you have a very different take on the funky thing. And you know how to play regular funk, but you can play this, what at the time seemed to be kind of abstract, like displacing beats and stuff like that, funk. And I went, yeah, I'd say so. I think that's pretty fair evaluation. I said, but I really am a jazz drummer, and I'd rather play straight-ahead jazz. And he said, well, look, man, come over and play with me, and I want to hear you. I said, okay. So Paul and I went over to play with him at some studio in San Francisco. This was in the Bay Area. And and he said, we played, Paul and I had those rhythms like we used on Actual Proof together years and years before we met Herbie Hancock.
That's amazing. That's amazing because it's such an original conception. The idea that you play a different kind of funk drums is like the understatement of the century. You know what I mean? The thing that you did with you eliminated the pattern, I think, from. You know what I mean? It's not like some sort of 1 or 2 bar pattern. It's like this rolling thing, like what Elvin used to do. And you, as far as I can tell, does that sound accurate?
Yeah, it is. It's sort of an improv. It's a beat and a groove rather than blowing a bunch of rolls and a bunch of stuff.